Hello. Today will be our first lecture for critical thinking. As you can see, this is John Beverly talking to you, hopefully over PowerPoint slides and with no visual representation of me in particular. I prefer you see the slides and hear my voice. But let's go ahead and get started. So, preliminary info, I'm going to go over this quickly because I already made an introductory video saying some of this content, but I do want you to have some PowerPoint slides with it so you can look at it at your leisure. A couple of things about me. I'm a logician. I think I mentioned that last time. Not a magician, although I know some tricks. I'm a graduate student at Northwestern. I've been teaching at the Art Institute for a while. I've been teaching for a while in general, actually for about 6 years, maybe 7 now. Geez, I'm old. You can find more about this on my website. There's a link there. Just type in my name and then the obligatory.com. I also consult at various places using my formal background. Blender Logic, it's a logic company. Who says there are no philosophy factories, am I right? We're working on ontology, which is basically building controlled, structured vocabularies for data scientists. I'm a member in particular of the National Center for Ontological Research. Here's some stuff we're going to do in the class. This is more or less from here on out pedagogy content. This class is oriented towards teaching you problem-solving skills and strategies. I'm going to expect that you solve problems posed in class in small groups or breakout rooms, and I'm going to pitch problems. I'm going to assign groups randomly, and I'm going to jump around to groups to provide guidance. I think group work is perfect. It's probably how most classes should be taught. It lowers tension, lowers the sort of power dynamic that's implicit between instructor and students. And I think you're generally probably more likely to be comfortable talking to one another, especially on a tough problem, than you are to just me while the rest of the class watches. This is a lot different, or probably even more intense in class. If I were to walk up to you and be like, solve this question, right? Just out of the blue, in front of everybody. That's a high tensity situation. Oh, my cat has decided to join us. Hi, Otis. You gonna make an appearance? You gonna let me? Okay. So she's already bored. Now the puzzles themselves are going to generate tension. And one of the skills you'll be learning in this class is how to manage discomfort when presented with tough problems. There might be times when the course seems a little unstructured or confused. You'll need to trust that I'm guiding you in the right direction. I've been doing this for a while, and building tension and discomfort in class is part of the point. I don't mean I'm going to make you feel uncomfortable in a sort of in any hopefully in any inappropriate way. What I mean is I'm going to make you feel frustrated and stressed out the way you will when you are exposed to tough problems in the wild. In a lot of classes like this, in critical thinking, that is, professors will give you these sterile problems, these abstract problems that are related to the real world, but then you're asked to solve them on your own in a relaxed environment where you don't have to think very hard. That's not really how problems arise in the real world. Problems arise more like scenarios which you probably heard about, Google interviews, where you're in an interview and somebody gives you a tough, challenging problem to solve, and you have to do it on the fly. That's more like the sort of way you'll experience problems or puzzles in your daily life than it would be if they were just presented sterilely in a comfortable, relaxed environment. So I'm basically going to teach you how to solve problems in the way you would experience them using the skills we cover. One of the ways to help break tension in general is going to be by meditating. I'm gonna have you meditate whenever we meet, and at the beginning of whenever we shift over to a different topic in a lecture. I'm going to ask you to meditate. I want you to think of this as a way to cleanse your cognitive palate, as it were. I want you to take the meditation seriously. It's very important. It's been associated with lots of cognitive and health benefits, and it will not be very long, but it is going to be a great way to center you, to get you to focus on a problem, and let go of other problems you might be working on. Lots of the time people will get distracted while they're trying to solve a problem. This is your brain trying to be more comfortable. solving problems is not easy. Your brain is kind of inclined to do easy things, or when it can, we don't like seek out difficulty. Distraction is sometimes a way in which we do that. We try to solve a hard problem, make no progress, and we're like, oh, look, bird. And that's a lot easier to do than solve some of the problems that we'll cover in class. But I want you to center, meditate, focus, and we'll get through it together. Now, I also use spaced repetition, specifically in discussion boards and homeworks. This is like a way in which I spread the material out over the course in sort of a strategic way and ask you to recall information from your long-term memory without using your notes. The more you do this, the stronger the connections will be between the course content and like parallel course contents, and also like the stronger your memory of the content will be. So also, it's practice. Practice makes perfect. And I don't want you to spend a lot of time outside of the class thinking about the strategies. I want you to just spend time in class doing that. And if you follow the sort of like spaced repetition outline, the meditation, the other like the practice that we do in class, you're going to build those long-term memory associations and turn these into like these strategies into habits of thinking, which is what the goal of, that's the goal of this class, honestly. Like, I want you to build good habits. This massages the info into your brain. Think about this. Have you ever written a paper on a topic you knew lots about? Probably. I bet it was easy to write and was relatively good. Contrast, have you ever written a paper on a topic you didn't know a lot about? That was probably not the best paper, and I bet it sucked to write. I don't want you to have to remember a lot of stuff. I don't want you to have to think about what to remember. I want it to occur to you, just to come to you whenever you're like exposed to a problem in the wild. And that is a level of knowledge that's habit-based, not like specific content-based. So I want you, when you're exposed to problems or puzzles in the wild, for it to be like writing a paper you know something about already, rather than thinking, God, well, is that a fallacy? Wow, oh man, I got to think really hard about that. If you're doing that by the end of this class, then I didn't do my job. Okay, so sum here: spaced repetition conveys content to your long-term memory, in just the way I'm hoping to get it, like it's something you know a lot about by the time you've finished the course. Now, and and the content, hopefully, ideally, will just like be there in the way, whatever you're an expert, the knowledge or content about whatever you're an expert in is just there in your mind. Okay, so I mentioned discussion boards and homeworks. We're going to do the discussion boards in class. So I'll be there to answer questions. They're largely about summarizing material, tracking your progress, and making connections. I want you to be as honest as possible, no judgment. I want you to tell me what you learned and what you didn't. I want you to tell me if anything changed your mind or not. And we're going to revisit these over and over again. And this will be a good way for you to track yourself and for me to track what you're getting out of this. You'll have a week to do the homework too. Please do it before we meet. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be tough. I will discuss the answers in class if you want, and if there's enough interest, I'll post videos covering details of the sessions for those of you who aren't able to make it. Okay, so now on to the content. What's this? Description versus normative. First, as you'll become accustomed to, we're going to meditate. Now, I have some slides here. What I'm going to do is, instead of like each time run through meditation in this lecture, to save time, I'm just going to direct you to the meditation video that I'm going to post, which there'll be a couple of them. One of them will be Leaves on a Stream, one of them will be Loving Kindness. They're strategic. Please, I'll do the one I assigned during the lecture, but basically I'll just say I'll punt that for another video. So at this point, to illustrate, I would say pause, go get meditation, Leaves on a Stream, and then go follow that. It's less than 2 minutes, and then come back. Okay, so I'm going to skip through that, and we'll hop right over here into System 1 and System 2, assuming that you've done the Leaves on a Stream meditation. If you haven't, go do it. I'll wait. No, I'm kidding. Here we go. System 1 and System 2. Generally speaking, We need to be able to provide intuitive responses to problems we experience in the real world. It's not just that, like, not all problems are solved that way. This is largely true for, like, new problems and for analytic problems. When we meet, I'm going to be talking about a bat and a puzzle, or a bat and ball puzzle. It's what we call an analytic problem. It's one that requires a precise answer, and it has no room for error. This is the sort of thing you'll see in a math class. Sorts of problems in math classes, like algebra problems, those are going to fall under analytic. Now, don't worry. You can revisit this later and think about the connection between what I'm saying here and the bat and the ball puzzle. Don't worry. Again, I'm going to encourage that by, I don't know, discussion boards. What was it? You'll see more. Look, but for right now, researchers have suggested that a plausible way to understand cognition is by way of two distinct systems which operate in parallel during your reasoning. System one, it's intuitive, it's fast, it's coarse-grained, make quick decisions. I'm sorry, that's system one. System two is methodological, it's slow, it's fine-grained, it's real careful in the details, but it takes a while. So system one is going to give you answers to problems like this. So I did say a minute ago, sort of analytic problems are going to fall in or be associated with math problems, and it's true. But even among math problems, some involve a different sort of reasoning than others. So in this case, system one, intuitive, fast, coarse-grained. What's the answer? You didn't have to think about it. That's the important part. You know the answer to this without reflection. Now, what about this? System two, methodical, slow, coarse-grained. You gotta run the algorithm, right? You gotta do the number crunching, unless you memorized it. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. If we were only equipped with just system two, a careful, methodical thinking, we would have never survived evolutionarily. If we were only equipped with the first system, we would have never developed things like technology. That requires careful, detailed, precise thinking. Now, this is reductive. In truth, we need both systems for development and survival. We need system two to develop, also to develop technology. Let's see, the discovery of DNA is a good example. It popped out like a moment of insight to Crick, right? And similarly, we need system one if we were gonna survive evolutionarily. We need to be able to sharpen weapons, for instance. So both of these things are going to be, or systems, these proposed or theoretical constructs are needed, presumably, for us to both survive and thrive. Now, we're at the stage in our development where we need to be intentional about when to use which. Think about this. Expert tennis players, they shouldn't be thinking about how exactly to swing a racket. They should just swing, right? They don't have that kind of time, right? Lots of things are happening at once. It would be a waste of their effort to really reflect on how exactly should I hold the racket. This is like that old fable of a millipede. Somebody asks a millipede that can talk, apparently, how do you walk? And immediately it collapses, right? Too much to navigate. But similarly, you also shouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about how you put one foot in front of the other, right? You just walk. That's what you do. You have expertise if you're able to walk. You have expertise in that. You have expertise in lots of things. If you're able to use your hands for fine-grained, knitting, right? That is expertise. That's something you develop over time, and you probably don't think a lot about it when you're doing it. At least maybe some of the simple tasks. I think very carefully about it because I'm not good at it, right? Or if you're playing an instrument, or more likely in maybe painting or sculpting or something, there's expertise involved. And if you thought really hard about it, then you wouldn't be able to do it so well. But there's expertise everywhere. Okay, that's the point here. One of the strategies we'll be developing in the course is identifying sort of system one heuristics, the sort of intuitive judgments that you can trust, because you can't trust all of them, but you can trust lots of them. Another is to teach you when it might be a good idea to rely on slower methodical thinking. as like a sort of methodological conceit here, I think developing system 2 thinking should always, if it's useful, be the goal, with the goal of making it system 1 thinking. This is all I mean by saying like careful, rigorous, analytical thinking. The goal of using that should be to develop, to make it like intuitive, so you don't have to reflect on it. And that's part of the time saving I'm gonna be proposing, or time saving measure I'm gonna be proposing in this class. Like hard, rigorous, analytical thinking over and over again. If you try and practice, at some point you won't have to think about it. When I see puzzles, I don't have to think very carefully about lots of them. I just kind of like know what to do. I'm a logician. I do proofs for a living. I don't like with like many proof systems. I don't have to think very carefully about the thing I'm proving. I just kind of like see it because I've been doing it for many years. Now, this is not true of any proof system, but the more and more I learn about it, the more and more general problem-solving strategies I learn to develop, like, I don't know, the ones I'm going to teach you about in critical thinking, the more the vaster array of problems that fall into that like intuitive mastery. Honestly, it has made and continues to make my life a lot easier than it used to be. I want this course to do that for you. So any kind of like rigorous analytical thinking that we engage in this class is going to be for the sake of practice. So by the time you leave, it's as much like quick intuitive judgments as it possibly can be, because that's where the expertise is. So they're still gonna like to get there. These sorts of like this sort of like habit building is gonna require a lot of system 1 thinking, but with practice you're gonna get there. Okay, it's like training a muscle. You keep developing the expertise, keep practicing, you're gonna get better at it, and at some point you're gonna have like a swole mind. You're gonna be like buff, being able to throw up some plates, mentally speaking. Now, you pop over here. Before we get there, I'm gonna discuss a few like things for us to avoid, or at least keep in mind as problems, things to watch out for. We're bad at thinking about the long term, and habit forming, like, or developing habits, is long term thinking. Like, I'm telling you, let's do this, like, yay, train habits right now, but you're gonna have to keep in mind like the payoff. And long-term thinking is not something we're good at. So it's hard to motivate us to do stuff now for payoffs in the future, is what I'm saying. So finance researchers have studied this for several years. It's actually because it's difficult for like even reasonable, educated, informed people with high incomes to save for the future. Like, that should be weird, right? Like, why do we have such a hard time saving for the future? It's coming, right? Like, most of us can be pretty confident we're going to be alive. Like, what do we think is going to happen? Why is that difficult? This is, of course, exacerbated by socioeconomic disparities and cultural differences over money. But like, even in the best case, like, or even in a case where you have enough money to save, it's still hard for people to do this. Why? So if this were class, I'd ask you, and we'll talk about this a little, so you can think about it a bit if you want now. I'd ask you this question, but for right now, I'm going to take a stab at some answers, and I feel fine about raising this question now because, we really don't know what's going on, but we have some guesses. You can reflect on them. So researchers have observed sort of curious fact about cognition surrounding savings. It turns out, like, when you're thinking about yourself, this specific part of your brain lights up. Not this one in particular. This is clearly not an accurate representation of the human brain. Not enough folds. Okay, but a specific part of your brain lights up. There's me. That's what I'm thinking about myself. But if you think about others, another part of your brain lights up. Like, if I were thinking about that person who, like, surprisingly looks like Natasha Leggero. This was taken at a wedding in California with at a friend of mine's wedding, and she has like a lot of famous friends. Maybe that is Natasha Leggero. Right now, I'm thinking about Natasha Leggero in some other part of my brain than the one that pops up when I think about myself is lighting up. Who is this bro? I don't even know who this is. No, in any event, when you're thinking about yourself in the future, this is the important part. The part of your brain associated with thinking about other people lights up. Who is this person in the future? Just imagine this is an age photo of me. So this sort of like provides at least a physiological, a tentative physiological explanation for why we tend to refrain from saving for ourselves in the future. Why would you save for somebody else? You wouldn't. That's future me's problem, as the venerable bard Homer Simpson once said. So problems. So we're going to have to work on that sort of like delayed gratification is one of the what it's called in psychology fields, or in the field of psychology. And don't worry, when we meet in groups, that's where we're going to pick up. We're going to start training that sort of delayed gratification instinct you have. Right now, I want to point out some other things to keep in mind: emotions versus rationality. Here's some topics to guide us. Those are just examples. So, look, we've all been caught up in emotions before: anger, stress, frustration. It's all compromise, cognition, and memory. It's a lot harder to think carefully when you're upset. Like, surely you've experienced this. You've been in a fight with somebody. You know you're right. You got the high ground, but they piss you off, and you're like, you know what? And then your brain goes, not today. And then maybe you don't say anything. Hopefully, best case scenario, that's probably what you should do. But or maybe you overextend and say something that doesn't really follow, doesn't really link up, but comes from a place of anger or stress or frustration. You regret it. You know you could have said something better, but you're kind of hampered. And like, this has been well supported by our psychologists. Like, these sorts of emotions get in the way of careful, rigorous thinking. System 2, remember that slow sort of methodical thinking doesn't operate well under these conditions, much like a computer doesn't operate well when it's hot. And you can think about it like that. Like, these emotions, they make you hot, man. You're hot. and your operating system isn't going to perform too well under those conditions. Now, this sort of like first line there, these are some standard like examples, the sort of contrast here for emotions and rationality, like Hyde and Jekyll, Spock and McCoy, Plato and Hume. I'm going to talk about these last ones over here, among others, as illustrating the sort of reasons one might have for preferring one of these sides over the other because they're philosophers. In particular, Plato, philosopher, claimed that reason was the highest cognitive faculty, faculties. This is the analytic stuff. This is the slow, methodical thinking. He thought emotions just got in the way, and if we could all reason without emotions, our lives would be perfect, he thought. Freud more recently proposed a view that it was under the guise of psychotherapy. He divided the mind into id, ego, and superego. This actually tracks Plato's analogy he used to use when he was talking about this, where you had like two horses. One was the appetites, and one was the passions, I think. And reason was like the charioteer. Like, here you have id and ego, which is like id is like the base instincts, and ego is the thing that interacts with reality and creates strategies for satisfying the desires that the id it's weird to say id wants, but like that emerge from the id. And then the superego is like the moral check on both. Now, that's the sort of like the analogy, or like the sort of metaphor you might think about with respect to like how emotions and reason interact. But both Freud and Plato seem to have this thread where they thought, reasoning, the charioteer / the superego, those are the things. Those are like those should be prioritized. Like, the careful, methodological, highly rational part of your mind is the thing that should be in control. Now, David Hume, this philosopher who urged that reason doesn't deserve that sort of priority status, since it can never influence the emotions anyway. He used to say it's not inconsistent to prefer the destruction of the world to the pricking of my thumb. Like, and by inconsistent, he means logically inconsistent. He's like, there's no contradiction here. It's just like emotion is not the sort of thing that can be influenced by logic, is the point. This is what this led him to say, because he thought, like, we couldn't influence these emotions, but they drove everything we did anyway. He thought reason is and always ought to be a slave to the passions. Like, rationality is just informed but never informs your passions. He thought we were not reasonable animals, just reasoning animals. So we're not like rational. We just like post hoc rationalize. And that reasoning always comes after the fact. It's motivated by desires, and we reason in such a way to make ourselves feel better about what we've done and what we want. But that doesn't mean we're reasonable. That just means we're post hoc reasoners. This sort of like was echoed to some extent by Thomas Reid, who was a contemporary of Hume's, where like Freud and Plato prioritized reason over desires and perceptions and passions. Reid wondered why reason got such special treatment. He said, look, if you think about perception, you think like, you see a stick in water and it looks bent, this perceptual illusion, right? Like, and then we correct it with reason, right? We're like, oh no, that's not really bent, that's just the water. He's like, so we don't really trust perception, right? We have like this check on it. But like reason and perception come from the same shop, as it were. So like emotions come from the same shop too. Like Reid thought it was God. Like God made it all. If God made one thing flawed, he made it all flawed potentially, right? Like we shouldn't just blanket give trust to reason. It comes from the same shop. We don't have to go theological here. We just say like evolutionarily. Like it all comes from the same shop. Like if it's a matter of fitness, like evolutionarily, why trust reason over the passions or reason over perception, right? Like it seems like they emerge from the same place. Why would reason get priority? So these thinkers, I don't think any of them were exactly right. I think they proposed like a false dichotomy because many of them are thinking like it's either reason or it's either the passions. Like one of those two, or reason or emotion. One of those two is going to be the way or the thing you should prioritize when you're like trying to guide your life or think about what the right thing to do is. I think this is false dichotomy. Just because there are two options presented to you doesn't mean one of those options is always true. Like if you're trying to decide where to go to dinner with your partner, providing two options, as I'm sure you know, won't immediately suggest that those are the only two options for places you can eat. Like clearly, we've all been in this, or many of us have been in this sort of situation where you propose two options and somebody's like, I don't want either of those. Let's go to Taco Bell. Incidentally, if you just offered one they didn't like, you'd be in a lengthy discussion about where to eat. But the point here, though, is false dichotomy. This sort of reason versus the passions, reason versus the emotions, just a false dichotomy. There's another option on the table, namely both. Both are important. You can have both, and you should have both. If you're thinking about yourself as holistically, as an individual who engages with the world, you need both careful thinking, but also intuitive judgments. You need the passions, you need emotion, but you also need rigor. So I don't think we should prioritize one or more of these aspects of the mind. I think it's silly to do so. It really is, to me, it's like dehumanizing. Like I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to make you logical, because you are also an emotional creature. We should hone that and own it, right? It's part of us. So one way to point some of the importance out here is this researcher named Damasio, who worked with people who had parietal lobe damage. If you're familiar with Phineas Gage, he had like a railroad spike that was shot through this part of his brain. He lived. He was fine for the most part, except the damage in his brain sort of made him cold and difficult to talk to, and he had a hard time planning for the future. So people with this sort of damage, typically they have like perfect executive function, which is to say that they can reason carefully, rigorously. They got that system 2 stuff down, but they have a hard time valuing things. That results in situations they've considered disagreeable or robot-like, where they're like unable to like pick a choice between options that, like logically speaking, are consistent. So the best example, I think, from Damasio's research isn't actually from the research. It's from like in between sessions. There's an anecdote where one of the people with this sort of damage to the parietal lobe was asked if they want to meet next Tuesday at 2 or next Thursday at 5, and the person says he's like spent 45 minutes looking at his notebook, trying to think about which one to go to, like which way to go in that option. And at some point the researcher said, how about Thursday? And he said, okay. Like, he, like, logically, rationally, intellectually, like, he could work it out, right? He can make a decision if there was, like, an inconsistency or something, or if something logically followed from something else. But this was like a value judgment, right? And people with parietal lobe damage, they have difficulty placing values on decisions. And that can leave you stuck in a researcher's office for 45 minutes flipping in your notebook between Tuesday and Thursday. Now, I'll stop there. We will pick up in group work, and I will ask you, as I mentioned, some tough questions, and we'll work through them together and start building these critical thinking habits.